What's going on, guys? Welcome back to episode 3 of the Research Radar. Today we're going to primarily focus on your guys' Q&A from the last 2 weeks. I think it'll be helpful. Want to do more long-form content like this, but as I'm moving, don't have a ton of time to go through everything that's changed industry-wise. I will cover that on the next episode. Hopefully I can get Gavin on as well. But I'm in the process of moving. That's why this is a different camera angle. My room is pretty bare bones right now. Everything's getting picked up on Monday. So I appreciate all you guys' patience. I already recorded this once, the file got corrupted. So let's hop right into this. Before I get into it, research use only, not for human consumption, not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I just want to make sure everything that I am giving out is anecdotal and you guys do your own research on stuff. So first question we got is Diego S. He asks, can AHKCU and GHKCU serum be used for the face and the hair? I've never seen AHKCU be used for anything besides hair loss and hair regrowth treatment. So you can combine AHKCU and GHKCU into a hair serum. The GHKCU is going to provide extra collagen synthesis and skin remodeling. So that's going to help with the scalp as well, basically boosting all of those growth factors. The AHKCU is primarily only for hair though. I've never seen it used in a skin serum or anything like that. I just recommend going the GHKCU route if you are looking for a face serum. The next question we got is from Keely. What is the difference in reconstitution waters and what peps need that water? So I'll break it out really simple for you. You have backwater, you have sterile water, you have acetic acid, you have phosphate buffered saline, and then you have a bunch of other solutions that kind of vendors have came out with. In my opinion, you only need the three. You need bacteriostatic water, you need acetic acid, and you need phosphate buffered saline. Bacteriostatic water is going to be used for 95% of peptides. It's basically just a sterile water with a benzyl alcohol 0.9% preservative in it. And it's going to keep it good for anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. You can kind of push on that 10-week mark. Once you puncture it and actually reconstitute, you can reconstitute peptides anywhere, in my opinion, from 30 to 60 days. I don't really push past that. I have pushed it to 60 days. Now I lean more towards the 30-day side just because I'm reconstituting more peptides and stuff like that. That's basically just going to prevent bacterial growth over that period. And yes, the last day you puncture that thing. So you start reconstituting the first day, you have about 30 to 60 days to keep reconstituting peptides with that, and you'll get the entire shelf life of the peptide after reconstituted. So you'll still get 6 to 8 weeks after you reconstitute, even if it's on day 30 of the water, for example. The next one, acetic acid, will go to. This is used for certain peptides like AOD, IGF-1 LR3. There's some people that say they use it for TESA. There are some other peptides too that if it's an acidic solution and it's prone to gelling or aggregation, that's when you'd use a mixture of kind of the two. I'll give you two examples. I've used acetic acid and bacteriostatic water for AOD, a 2.4 ml backwater, and then 0.6 ml acetic acid, and that never gelled on me. So that's what I've used for that. For an IGF-1 LR3, that one is a typically very acidic. So I do 1 ml backwater, 1 ml of acetic acid. You're going to have to play with the ratios because a lot of people don't realize the climate you're in, as well as how much humidity is in the air, can contribute to all those temperature fluctuations, aggregation, etc. Not to mention all the stuff that could have happened in transit. And yeah, so you're just going to have to play with the ratios on those. And then last but not least, phosphate buffered saline. I got a lot of questions about this. It's basically a solution that is very neutral compared to a lot of the others. Like backwater, for example, is anywhere from 4 pH to 7 pH. Phosphate buffered saline is a little bit on the higher end of that range. So it's around 7. It's very neutral to like 7.7 pH. This is used specifically for ARA290. There are some other peptides I've seen reconstituted with it because they want a more neutral solution. I've never played with that. The only one I've used is ARA290 with PBS. So I hope that helps give you a little bit of a breakdown. Have I ever talked about epithalon and pinolon? Yes, I have, Heather. Pinolon is great for circadian rhythm reset, in my opinion. A lot of times it has a calming effect for a lot of researchers. And epithalon also has that circadian rhythm benefit, but it's more a telomerase lengthener for longevity. It's one of those things you won't notice right off the bat. I did notice some sleep benefits from it, so I think it's good. I just don't think you're going to notice extreme effects from either one of those. The Penelon, I will say, does make you a lot calmer than the Epithalon, but I post on both of those. So, Kano asks, what peps do you consider best taken in nasal spray? So, let me give you an entire spiel that I always give out about molecular size. So, there are peptides that have been studied exclusively in nasal spray form. Those are things like Samac, Selank, DSIP. There's more out there as well. I'll go through a whole list at the end. But the whole idea of this is you want the Dalton size. The Dalton size is the size of a molecule of the peptide. You can look this up online, you can Google it. For example, if I go right now and type in GHKCU Dalton size, it should pop up 340 to 400 Daltons. So that's going to be the general guideline, right? So the nasal spray can only absorb through the nasal mucosa. And there's a couple ranges for this. 0 to 500 Daltons, that's going to be the peptides that are most likely to absorb and pass the nasal mucosa. The next range is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 Daltons. These can pass the nasal mucosa, but it's not guaranteed. Anything 1,000 plus, I really don't believe is going to get absorbed properly unless you're looking for like a localized effect. So, 1,000 plus, a lot of these GLPs and stuff like that are like 3,000 plus Daltons. It's basically the size of the amino acid chain. So typically the smaller, simpler peptides can kind of be used in a nasal spray. The ones that I think are the most studied and have the most efficacy behind them, DSIP, Samax, Selank, throw Atomax in there because technically it's different. Oxytocin, KPV has good localized effects. A GHKCU could technically work, but a lot of that's not going to go systemic in my opinion. There are certain routes with this too that, the nasal sprays, if it works more on the immune system and has to go straight to the blood-brain barrier, you'll notice a lot of those things that I mentioned, like the Samax Link DSIP, it's all working kind of on the neurochemistry. And last one I'd add to that list is VIP. So all of those are the ones I'd consider in nasal spray. The other ones, like NAD plus in nasal spray, I'm not completely convinced, especially because it doesn't work that great for a lot of researchers anyways. So just kind of keep your eye out, look at the Dalton size. That's a general scale. There is some complexity to it, but those are the basic guidelines. Next question from Tracy. Aliquid, when to, how to, reasons for and against in the individual researcher landscape. If I'm correct, I did look this up a little bit. Aliquid, and I might be butchering that, is basically when you reconstitute a peptide, split it up into some sterile vials, and then throw the vials that you're not using in the freezer. I've seen this done before with HCG specifically because some people believe that the efficacy is lost after about 2 weeks with that one. And for that one, it was fine. The only thing I'd be careful of is peptide aggregation, and when you do freeze a peptide that's in reconstituted form, I would never do it personally. The amino acid chains can basically expand out with that temperature, and they have the potential to either break those amino acid chains, and technically when you dissolve them, they would come back together, but you don't know if those are going to bind properly. So I wouldn't freeze my reconstituted peptides. I don't see the need for it, especially when you have access to a bunch of different sizes and stuff like that. So I tend to leave that one alone. Jonna asks, washout protocols for the most popular PEPs. So I'll go through a couple of the popular ones. We'll pick one from 4 different categories. So first one, we'll just talk about GLPs. We all know these are run pretty long-term with stuff, so you don't need a washout per se. I do believe some people will never wash out of these PEPs. However, if you're doing it more in a context where you want a fat loss phase of 12 to 16 weeks, somewhere in there, I would take at least 3 months off from the peptide after that, just because of what we know about the GLP-1 receptor sensitization, but also the half-life. So for GLPs, it's going to take 4 weeks for it to even clear your system. So the washout doesn't even start till 4 weeks after because the GLP is peak concentration and it's slowly going to titrate out of your system until you hit that 4 weeks where it's at 0. So at least 2 months. If you want full resensitization, I would say 3 months, and that's going to depend drastically on how long the GLP was in play and at what dose. If you're at something like 15, it might take a lot longer for those receptors to resensitize. So anywhere from 2 to 3 months. If you're on for years, it could be 6 months. We really don't know with that one. We'll go healing next, BPC 157. This one typically anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks during the duration of the injury. So basically, if you have that injury, you're going to do it daily for that 6 to 8 weeks. After that, you should give it at least 4 weeks off, in my opinion, and it should only be used when needed for that injury. If it's a longer injury, in my opinion, if it doesn't heal up within 6 to 8 weeks, it's probably not benefiting that much from the BPC, but I have seen people push it to 8 or 12 weeks and then take that 4 week off period. So that's that one. GH secretagogues, we'll do tesamorelin because that's the most popular right now. Typically run from 12 to 16 weeks, and the washout for that one's about 4 weeks. There hasn't been much receptor desensitization shown in the studies with that one. So a lot of people have just kind of kept this in continuously. I personally like to err on the side of caution and allow those IGF-1 levels to dip a little bit. The idea behind that is resensitization, but also clearing out those growth factors. So you don't want to have that IGF-1 elevated all the time, especially if you're more in it for the longevity purposes. In my opinion, it's always good to wash out for at least a week with those. And then I'll go more on the kind of like skincare immune side. We'll go with a GHKCU. Typically, this one is run anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks with a 2 to 4 week washout period. Personally, I believe the whole copper receptor doesn't really down regulate. So everything you're hitting with GHKCU with the collagen synthesis, you more just reach peak levels and then you have to maintain. So if you don't go too high with this one, I think this one is one you can kind of run year round. However, maybe after 12 weeks, you just take, 4 weeks off just in case those copper levels were a little bit high. That's something you can get tested on blood work. So those are the 4 categories, and hopefully that gives you some idea on how to go about it. Each peptide is going to be drastically different. Diana, how to make your own GHKCU serum with hyaluronic acid. I did a whole video on this. Basically, you're going to need the raw powder, you're going to need the HA, you are going to need a preservative if you want to keep it at room temperature. I used Germall Plus in my video. Just make sure you go search that, and it's also on YouTube as well. This was an interesting one from Andrea. Peptides aren't anything new, but I understand fads and how certain things gain popularity and interest. This somehow feels different, and I'm not sure how to explain what I mean by that. How do we go from whispers to mainstream media so quickly, aside from GLPs being the obvious entry point for the popularity? This has to be more, is it nefarious or generally organic? I can't recall any health trend or topic that's come in with such momentum. Here's my opinion on the whole thing. GLPs work so well to the point where people in obese populations, where they're not changing exercise, they're not changing lifestyle, they're not changing their diet, they're still losing about 20 to 40% of their body weight during these trials. With that crazy amount of results, you stack that with people living the lifestyle, getting active, lifting weights, doing all of that, they see insane results, right? So when you have all of this, back and forth between these populations, it's working for everyone across the board, right? That's the generic entry point. However, they're going to, go tell people about their success, and let's be honest, the number one issue in America is obesity. That leads to a lot of mortality, it leads to a lot of issues down the line. If we could solve that, that would be great, right? So that's a huge entry point. I'd say you got about 50 to 60% of the population right there. Then with peptides, you have all the other routes people are trying to optimize. You hear about the GLPs, how great they work. Well, other peptides have to work too. So people go down the nootropic route, especially people in college or looking for a cognitive boost if their job is, highly demanding of them. So you have those people in the nootropic crowd. Then you have the inflammation crowd, people that have just lived forever with either autoimmunes or chronic inflammation. They're getting into the space. Then you have even younger people with the looks maxing and all the other stuff. You have the melanotan, you have GHKCU, you have KPV, all that stuff. So you're pushing all these crowds into the peptide space all at once, and they actually work is the thing, right? So people are getting results. They don't all work as great as the GLPs, but that was the revolutionary thing in my opinion, and now people are just going to keep going down the rabbit hole. We all know how much we go down different pathways. Now I'm pretty sure if any of us have an issue that pop up, we start researching peptides that could potentially solve it. So I think it's just a breaking point with the GLPs, and now everybody is, trying to optimize as much as possible. Brenda asks, is PBS only used for ARA 290 or can it be used for another peptide? We'll answer that one first. I've only used it for ARA 290. I don't find a need with it for anything else. Some people have claimed to use it in GHKCU to help with the burn, but you want to be careful because you don't want that peptide to go too neutral. The copper can unbind at some point. Never seen that happen, but I would say be careful there. It's basically just a buffer to get it to a more neutral pH. I would look up the acidity of the peptide and if that would make sense. What is the protocol for TB500 after reconstitution? Some research says 2 times a week, others say daily. I'm already on KPV and also GHKCU, so I don't personally see the point to do a blend. Correct. So if you're doing the KPV and GHKCU, they don't do a blend. This is the thing with TB500. There's protocols that do daily right alongside BPC that are, anywhere from 250 to 500 micrograms 1 to 2 times per day. And that works great for injury. Anecdotally, in the research space, a lot of people have run it this way. In the past, I was seeing a lot more TB500/TB4 done 2 times a week, and that's at 2.2 milligrams. I've seen anywhere from 2 milligrams to 2.2 milligrams 2 times a week for injury. And the idea there is you just get a higher spike in TB, right? So you have a ton of healing, it kind of titrates down, then you hit the system again, so it heals more. That's more of an opinion piece. I just see a lot of researchers do the daily right with the BPC because of the convenience. However, that's one of the things you're gonna have to work out with your own research and just kind of experiment with. So yes, there are 2 protocols for that one. It's one of those things, whatever works better. Oscar asks, protocols for N-acetyl-salicylamidate and N-acetyl-sumaxamidate. So these are basically the same research guidelines as Sumax-Salinc, just the normal versions. However, the N-acetyl and the amidate modifications make it survive longer in the system and it's longer acting. So for this one, still a lot of those Sumax and Salinc protocols are anywhere from 200 micrograms all the way up to a milligram. It's the same for these. I would just say start a lot slower with these. Go on the smallest end of the range, start low, build your way up, and see where you end up. Anywhere from 200 micrograms, start there, and then you can kind of boost it if needed. However, a lot of people find themselves in the 200 to 300 microgram range with the modifications. Another one on ARA, we're gonna skip that one. Tabs Garcia asks, what peps you shouldn't take at the same time, which one should be cycled and why? I'll address the first part of that question. So you should look at the receptors being hit and the mechanisms at play for peptides. I got a question a couple weeks ago about MOTS-c and glutathione at the same time. Will they cancel out the effects of each other? And theoretically, they could, because MOTS-c is inducing a stress signal and glutathione is a repair. Well, like it's signaling a repair. It's your number 1 antioxidant. So you're increasing oxidative stress and, a stress signal, not oxidative stress by itself, and you're trying to heal the system at the same time. So that doesn't make much sense. I would say anything that induces a stress response would make most sense in the morning because cortisol levels are peak. So anything like energy peptides in the morning, and then anything repair-wise, so GHKCU, BPC, KPV, TB500, that makes more sense at the nighttime for me specifically because you're in that natural repair state. Cortisol is low, you're going to bed, repair is taking place. That's when the glutathione would make sense. So I would just say watch what signals you're sending, know the mechanisms underneath it. You should be doing all this research beforehand and don't overlap 2 things that just don't make sense, right? So a stress and a repair doesn't really make sense at the same time. It would be the same thing with like a GLP and taking a GHRP6 that would increase hunger. It's it doesn't make much sense. So kind of use the research, use the mechanisms there. I'd like to hear more ideas like your unlimited energy guide. Yep, more of those coming. That was just a mixture of anecdotal and just time, with the actual peptides. So some of that stuff does take time. Amy asks about glutathione raw. Can a serum be made with hyaluronic acid? If so, how much per ounce of HA? And it can become combined with other raws in a serum. Yes, I've seen raw glutathione be used in serums and different products. I don't have any experience with it. I'll do some research on it for sure. However, you can definitely make a serum with it. A GHKCU and glutathione could go well together. I have seen it. I just don't have any personal experience with it. How long to stay on certain peptides? It's going to be very dependent on the actual peptide. I went through some of those before. Stephen Power asks, I would like to discuss the bioavailability of injectable NAD+. I've done a lot of research and unfortunately haven't had much luck finding convincing arguments stating any bioavailability at all. Then to piggyback off that, there isn't clinical evidence published from any medical journals that show it has any bioavailability. This is actually a good point. It's a highly debated topic in the research space. So a lot of people believe that NAD plus molecule is too big to have any bioavailability. However, anecdotally in the research space, a lot of people find that supplementing with NAD plus gives them that boost. I would say it's most effective for older populations, even if the bioavailability isn't great, just getting some NAD plus in there to replace what's kind of diminished over time has shown some, promise, especially just from anecdotal reports. The research space is one of those things we don't have all the data, so you either have to go with the community says and kind of make your own judgment off either of those. NAD plus in specific started with a lot of IVs from wellness clinics and stuff like that. So, the IV I believe definitely has that bioavailability. I'm not sure about, the other options. Just kind of, you know, look on a bunch of forums, see the community feedback, and make your own judgment on that one. Barry asks, what lab company do you believe provides the highest quality testing and output? It's tough, right? So all these third-party testing labs are popping up, and we don't see a lot of the back end of them. It's one of those things where the community has to gather up around a lab and hold them to a higher standard and believe who we trust or not, right? So in my interview with the Anishek, we talked about some fake labs. If they pop up, they're not using real data, etc. It's 100% a possibility. I would say that whatever the majority of companies are using, you have to remember these companies are competitors at the end of the day. So somebody owns a lab, I wouldn't want to test with my competitor if someone was doing independent testing. We don't know who owns these labs either. I would say the most trusted right now, in my opinion, Yanishik, Vanguard, ILS is gaining some popularity in there. Just a lot of companies have switched over because they kind of, switched into peptide testing and they're kind of scaling properly. Another one that's been around, I mean, a lot of people used Freedom. A lot of people are switching away from Freedom because they can't offer the sterility and heavy metal testing. However, you just kind of go with, who the community believes in and who's testing. I'm going to try to get more information on those labs and stuff like that, but we kind of have to hold that standard at the end of the day. Kelsey asked this one. Basically, the situation was if a vendor sold a COA and it wasn't completed, the bioburden USP 61 came back as false, and then they retested it and they determined it was a false positive. So basically, USP 61 came back as failed, they retested it and it passed. Would you find that trustworthy? Would you toss the vial? So I asked Yanishik about this directly, and he said there can be false positives, especially if the lab messed up. So I have seen some labs retest for bioburden specifically. I'm not going to use that as an excuse. A lot of the times, if something fails sterility testing, it should fail at the end of the day. That's completely up to you on your judgment, whether you toss that or not. It could be different samples test. Some samples test positive, some samples don't test positive, depending on what happened during that, sterility little process. So it's up to you at the end of the day. I see a lot more vendors starting to test for sterility on multiple samples. So like one day Compounds is testing 3 samples for sterility. The Peptology is up to like 20 samples for sterility. Basically go with whatever you're comfortable with at the end of the day. And to answer the second part of your question, she asked buccal strips slash pouches. What are your thoughts on those new products? So I think they're very convenient for travel overall for the buccal strips. I don't think the bioavailability is 100%. Anyone trying to sell you that is lying straight to your face. I think it's anywhere from a 50 to 60% absorption, if I had to say. It could be lower than that. I have seen positives from them. However, I think it's more the thing you would take with you when you travel. If you don't want to take all your peps with you and something like that, or if it's a very simple molecule, something like a B12, I've seen NAD plus. I don't like the ones that combine anything like a BPC, a TB500, a CJC. Those are too big of molecules, in my opinion. It goes back to what we talked about the absorption through the nasal mucosa. It's the same thing for the buccal strips. If it's a very complex molecule, I don't believe it's going to fully absorb unless it has some other technology in there that allows it to absorb. This is not an everyday thing with the buccal strips. Like I said, travel would be the main use case for those. Pete asks about 5-amino Q, 5-amino 1MQ. How to use it, when to use it, who is it for, and why. Okay, let's hop into this one. So 5-amino 1MQ. In my opinion, it should be reserved for a fat loss stall or the end of a fat loss phase. This is a molecule that is an NNMT inhibitor and basically allows you to recycle the NAD plus you currently have in the system a little bit more efficiently. Instead of just discarding that NAD plus after it's used, it's going to keep recycling it for a longer period of time. This is why it's going to help during a fat loss phase when you do stall. Any stubborn body fat that's kind of there when you're, in a metabolically compromised state, it's going to work a little bit more efficiently at reducing that. So after about 6 to 8 weeks of a stall, I would throw it in. There are different protocols out there. There's the capsules, which are typically in 50 milligrams. It's kind of believed that the capsules aren't very absorbable, so you might get, from a 50 milligram capsule, in my opinion, that's equivalent to 1 milligram of the actual peptide itself. So, you can go up, the protocols for that one go from 50 milligram capsules 1 to 3 times a day for a total of 150 milligrams. And then for the regular peptide, I've seen, that one's all over the place. I've seen 1 milligram, 5 milligrams, 50 milligrams. I really don't believe you have to go above 1 mg with that one, but everybody's going to be different. Do your research and kind of go from there with those protocols. What's better, AHKCU or GHKCU? Depends on the use case. I would say GHKCU is, more popular for a reason because it's more a systemic benefit, and AHKCU has a very, niche use case with it. Or ARA, I will do a full post covering ARA. Buccal strips we actually talked about. We'll finish off with these three. Rita asks, what are people getting wrong about long-term peptide use and what trends in the peptide space concern you right now? I would say stacking way too many things is kind of an issue. I see people with 12 different peptides in their stack, and all of them, if they have a use case for the mechanism, if they're trying to target a specific thing with it and they know it's working, I just think way too many people are adding things into their stack, not knowing what's doing what, right? So I see people all the time with the mitochondria peptides, MOTC, SS31, 5-amino 1MQ, SLU, methylene blue. All these things get stacked at the exact same time. How do you know what's working? How do you know what might be causing side effects down the line? You have to keep that in mind. So I'd say stacking way too much. You got to realize people lose all this weight and stuff just with a GLP. They don't have to optimize anything else. I think a lot of us as researchers try to optimize every angle, but kind of slow down, read your biofeedback, see what's happening with all these things. It's kind of my main concern. Number 2, if someone's just starting out, what should they not do? Biggest beginner mistakes or risks? I would say same thing with this one. A lot of people don't realize that the COA amount is never the actual label amount of a peptide. That's the biggest beginner mistake, in my opinion. Things could be highly overfilled or underfilled, so make sure that you check that COA, check what the actual net content is, and reconstitute based off that. I'd rather go with real data rather than fake data. And then number 3, what's coming down the pipeline people aren't paying attention to yet. I think people are starting to pick it up, but I would just say all the next generation peptides, like there's the new amylin analog that Lilly is making that's supposed to be better than cagrilintide. Um, can't remember the name. It starts with an E, but things like that that are coming down the line. I made a post. Your freezer isn't a retirement plan because there's going to be new generations coming out. You don't need to stock up for 5, 10, 15 years. You know, if you love the one that you're on, yeah, you could stock up for 3, 4 years down the line, but you don't need to, go all in, if that makes sense. There's a lot of cool stuff coming too. Then, if I can move this up just to answer these last couple questions. Okay, what are the typical timelines for peppers to take effect? Like DSIP, will that work that same night? Adamax, if you have a crazy day and need focus, does it work that same day versus does that take time to build up? So the thing to look at here is half-lives and basically the data on how it builds up. I've seen things like Samax, Link, Adamax be taken over the course of 6 to 8 weeks because you have to think about it. You're peaking the system as it's coming down. If you keep adding to it, it's going to titrate up over time until you reach a peak concentration levels. A good example of that's like a GLP. It takes 4 weeks to build up in the system until you get peak appetite suppression and stuff like that. So I will say there's an acute effect for those, especially the smaller molecules. That's the thing you have to think about, in my opinion. The smaller molecules are going to be in and out a lot quicker. So something like a Max Link, especially in nasal spray form, you will see those acute effects same day. You will get buildup effects over time as you upregulate the pathways. So another thing to look at is pathways. So brain-derived nootropic factor. If you keep stacking that over time, you might create more neurons, more connections, clearer thinking. So yeah, in my opinion, it has both the acute effect and the long-form effect. Things like, things that are larger molecules, like I said, GLPs, that might take 4 weeks over time, and you're not going to see appetite suppression the same day. Some researchers do, a lot of people don't. It takes 3 or 4 days to kick in. So that's something just to keep in mind. Then the last question we had on this one, Josh Hansen, research with teenagers, are there safer peptide options for healing and immunity? There's no research done on teenagers specifically. A lot of them don't even have human trials, nevertheless clinical trials. So it's kind of just a risk tolerance thing at the end of the day. And everybody needs to do their own research as parents, as researchers. And, you have to realize that this is medical advice. At the end of the day, it's all research. So hope that helped. We got a nice little 30-minute Q&A in, so I appreciate all your guys' questions. I did have a second thread. I'll make sure to answer those in the next one. Appreciate all your guys' time, and that's it for Research Radar episode 3. Stay tuned for the move. A lot of cool stuff coming, a lot more long-form content like this.